So I think we will go ahead and get started for our FY27 budget presentation for the Enosburg-Richford Unified Union School District. So Morgan and I have a presentation that we will run through, and then I don't know if we have anyone online tonight, Courtney? Not yet? Okay, so you'll let us know if there are questions, if anybody comes on, and we have someone in the room, so we can feel free to stop if you have any questions, feel free to stop us along the way. So we'll start out by talking about some celebrations. So we have a lot of good things happening in our supervisory union, and in particular in the Enosburg-Richford district. There are things in our annual report that we just wanted to highlight. So we have some athletic teams. In Enosburg, we have D2 varsity baseball state finalists for 2025. We have our girls volleyball. They were state finalists as well for 2025. And our boys soccer team this fall was named the inaugural Vermont Soccer Officials Premier Sportsmanship recipients. So we're very excited about that honor. Our Richford Middle School students won the state championship for the GOB, and our Enosburg Middle School students won the 2025 Vocabulary Bowl. And that is an honor that they have earned several times now over multiple years. We're excited and proud of the drama program that we have rebuilt in FNESU, and we had last spring one-act plays put on here in Richford at the town hall, and in Enosburg this fall we had Once Upon a Mattress. We have some staff members who've been honored with some awards in both our Enosburg and our Richford schools. Adam Barkley, who works here in Richford Junior Senior High School, was honored with the Above and Beyond Award, as was Maggie Cavazos, our Flexible Pathways Coordinator from last year. And we also had we had Bev Maya at Enosburg Elementary School. She's a paraeducator. She was honored with that award, as well as Brenna Sturdivant, the Enosburg Middle High School counselor. Every year we give away Educators of the Year award, and our secondary teacher of the year, who was honored at UVM for the Educator of the Year ceremony, was Todd Marlowe this year for Richford Junior Senior High School. And we have several students that have done some pretty incredible things. We have Miley Decker from Enosburg Falls Middle High School, who is the Rail Jam champion for 2025 at the snowboarding competition. And we have 2 green and gold scholars for this year, Annabelle Elwood from Enosburg and Tristan Whitehouse from Richford Junior Senior High School. We also have Kenzie Marcy, who is first chair clarinet in the concert band for All States. She's from Richford Junior Senior High School. James St. Pierre placed first in the motorcycle repair competition at Skills USA for Cold Hollow. Richford High School has 2 students, Peyton Tracy and Sage Bohannon, who are the 2025 Hobie representatives. And we have from Enosburg Middle High School, Brody Wells, who is the 2025 track and field champion in the 200 meter. He also took second place in the 100 meter. We have several students that went on to All-State Chorus. 8 students went to the chorus, and 7 students went to the All New England chorus. And I think we have lots to celebrate here. So this is a look at our academic proficiency data. So we took a look at how we're doing in FNESU compared to the rest of the state. So the red represents the Vermont average. The blue represents FNESU average, and this reflects the VTCAP assessment results. So we have, thank you. We have in our 3rd grade, you can see that we've been working very hard. One of our goals is that all students will be reading on grade level by the end of grade 3. And we're excited to see the growth in our 3rd grade. We're within 4 percentage points of the statewide average for literacy. It's a little higher in 4th grade. We're about 6 percentage points off there in 4th grade. And by the time we get to 9th grade, we're within 3. We definitely have work to do in this area from grades 5 through 8. So we're not where we want to be yet, but we do know that we are making progress in that area, and we're working hard to get closer to the state averages, and the ultimate goal is to go beyond that. So that is our literacy data. Here is a look at our math data. We are very excited about our third grade data. We are 9 percentage points higher in third grade than the statewide average, and we're very close to the statewide average in most of the other grade levels. We've been doing a lot of work in both literacy and mathematics across the supervisory union. We have new literacy programs, and we've put a lot of time and effort into training our teachers and really focusing on our intervention system in an effort to better support all of our learners in FNESU. In math, we have also done quite a lot of professional learning, and again, that I think we're seeing the impact of us working hard on our MTSS system in mathematics as well. So this is a little bit about the district that we serve here. We're here to talk about the Enosburg-Richford district. So we have 5 schools within this district. We operate 2 pre-K through 5 elementary schools for a total of 412 students. We have 166 students at Richford Elementary, 246 at Enosburg Elementary. We operate 2 6 through 12 middle high schools, 219 students at Richford Junior Senior High School, 439 students at Enosburg Middle High School. We also are very fortunate in Franklin Northeast to have our own career and tech education program. So Cold Hollow Career Center is located within the Enosburg-Richford district. 93 of their students are from Enosburg, 30 of their students are from Richford, and we have 14 students who tuition into Cold Hollow from other parts of Franklin County. So we have some kids that are coming from MBU. I know we have had some students from Fairfax, and I'm not clear if this year we have any from BFA St. Albans, but when there is, BFA St. Albans has their own tech center, but if their programs are full, or if we offer a program that they don't, they're eligible to come here.
So we start the budget discussions with the board, and then the presentations here talking about our schools and our enrollment. And on the chart behind me, what you're looking at is the last 5 years of enrollment on the left side, leading up to the middle of the chart where we're at that 1,070 students in these 4 schools. And then we project it out for the next 5 years. And I'll say students at Cold Hollow are counted in the high school that they're enrolled in, and that's why Cold Hollow is not showing as a separate line. But if you look at this and you look at our projections, we are, over the next 5 years, expecting to stay relatively flat as a district. There'll be a slight increase, we think, in enrollment at the elementary school level, slight decrease at the high school level, but this relatively stable population is much different than what most of the rest of the state is seeing. We know as a state we're losing a lot of kids each year. That is being felt more so in the southern part of the state and in the eastern part of the state, and certainly is not the trend in Enosburg-Richford or really in Franklin County and Chittenden County in general. So when you do go to vote on town meeting day, or if you get your ballot early and vote then, the first 3 articles that you'll see on the warning are there to elect the officers. So we'll elect a moderator, a clerk, and then there are 3 school board seats that are up. 1 for a seat from somebody from Enosburg, and 2 for seats from somebody from Richford. Whether you're an Enosburg or a Richford resident, you're allowed to vote for all 3 of those seats. So please don't leave 1 or 2 of them blank because you don't think you're eligible to vote for them. The next article, Article 4, is kind of the major one for town meeting for us. And this is the one where we are asking the voters of the district to give the school board authority to spend just under $25.5 million for the next school year. We will be talking about this budget a lot in the coming slides, and the way that the state usually talks about education spending is on a per pupil basis. And so in that warning, the second line will say that that per pupil spending will result in a figure of $11,430. And we will be discussing that number quite a bit. It's 2.5% up from the per pupil spending in the current year, significantly lower than a lot of the increases that we're seeing with other districts that have warned their budgets.
So every year when we build our budget, we make sure that we're aligning our spending with the priorities that we've set for the supervisory union. So in 2022, the FNESU board developed these three board goals. So we're working very hard to improve academic proficiency at all levels. And in particular, we're focused in on all third graders being able to read at grade level or above by the end of grade 3. The research is strong that if we can get students to proficiency by third grade, they have a much better chance of later academic success. So we're putting a lot of time and effort and resources into that goal. We're also working really hard to ensure that our students are developing the skills that they need to succeed in a workforce that will be drastically different for them than it was for us when we entered the workforce. So we're doing a lot of work around our portrait of a learner and helping students to be able to demonstrate proficiency in those skills. The third board goal is centered around students being able to demonstrate social and emotional skills that will help them to succeed both in school and in life. And some of the skills, some of the competency areas that we're working on are students who are self-aware, they're able to have self-management, they're able to have agency, adaptable, social awareness and empathy, to have strong relationship skills, including collaboration, and be able to be responsible decision makers. So those are the board goals that we have prioritized. So much of what you see in the budget, those priorities are reflected throughout this budget. So I'll date myself by saying that when I first entered first grade, it was in the 1970s, and schools looked different then than they do now. And in the 1970s, we were very focused on what the workforce needed at that time. And at that time, the priorities were centered around the basic skills of writing, computation, reading, speaking, and listening. Those were the primary skills that we were being trained for, because that's what the workforce demanded at that time. So we're in a very different time now. There's recent research that has come out of the World Economic Forum, the Future of Jobs survey from 2024, where they took a look at employers, and they considered what skills did they feel were really core skills that they needed in their workforce. And the top 5 skills look different in 2025 than they did in 1970. So in 2025, analytical thinking, resilience, flexibility and agility, leadership and social influence, creative thinking, and motivation and self-awareness are the top 5 skills that employers have identified that they need in their workforce. So the content is still important, but students need to be able to have these skills to be able to learn and grow in a workforce that's being really transformed by the advent of artificial intelligence. And what I notice when I look at those skills is those are all skills that are inherently human and can't really be replicated by artificial intelligence. So the exciting news for us is that aligns pretty well with the skills that we've been focusing on with our Portrait of a Learner. So this Portrait of a Learner was developed around the same time that those board goals were developed. And so we've been working for many years to get to a place where our pre-K through 12 students are working towards demonstrating their proficiency in these 7 characteristics, and then there are 31 indicators under them that are focused on developing financially literate students who are independent decision makers, information savvy, creative thinkers, contributors, emotionally intelligent, and trustworthy. So we're pleased to see that the data is really supporting the work that we are trying to do with our students. And this has not been easy work. It's been very complex and messy work, because any kind of big change process is always a little bit messy before it gets clearer. But these students on the screen are why we're doing this work, because we feel it is very important for us to be able to adapt so that we can give the students what we feel they're going to need when they go out into the world.
So we talked about the $25.5 million budget. The increase is just over 1%, or about $260,000. And we'll touch on some of the decisions that the board made in setting this budget. Overall, we're cutting 8.5 full-time positions. These are positions either that we have not been able to fill historically or that have become vacant in the last year, and we've decided not to refill them. Despite cutting those 8.5 positions, we are anticipating over $500,000 more spending on health insurance alone. You can see up there that over the last 8 years, the premiums for a family plan have gone up 235%. This is something where this year we had an increase of around 7.5%, and that came as good news to us because it was the first time in a while that it hasn't been double digit. So, budget's up $250,000, but the health insurance line alone is $500,000. Some good news on the budget front. We are anticipating more high school students from sending districts, mostly the 4 towns in Northern Mountain Valley. And we've also been able to reduce the supervisor union assessment by just under $125,000. And we'll talk a little bit about that budget as we go on as well. In terms of the staffing cuts, we had an admin assistant position that we decided not to refill at Enosburg Middle School. There's a handful of paraeducators, primarily at the elementary school level, that came vacant, and we decided not to fill. And then there are several teaching positions, primarily at the 2 high schools, that either we haven't been able to fill or we've been able to make some shifts and decided that when somebody left, we didn't need to fill them.
We'll talk about the why of that as we get into Act 73 a little later on.
Yeah. And so that overall 8.5 drop is also inclusive of moving 2 full-time and 1 part-time teacher out of our federal grants into our local budget. And this is a decision that we've been making in both districts over the last couple of years, as there's more uncertainty from the federal government on what's going on. If we have some critical staff that we know we need to keep, we've been looking for opportunities to move them into the local budget. So again, they're included in that 8.5, so it really would be 9, 10, 11 positions overall that are reduced from one budget to the next. We've got 2 slides here that show that that proposed budget based 2 different ways. This first one is based on what we spend our money on. So you can see roughly the 2/3 in red are the dollars that we spend on our own staff and their benefits. So this section, the 20% at the bottom in that dark red, is on staff benefits, and most of that is that money that's eaten up by healthcare. Kind of going around the clock, the section in blue are all kind of considered purchased services. The larger one there at just under 19% is primarily the supervisor union assessment. So the things like the food service program, transportation costs, special educators are kind of included in that larger blue section. And then up top, the last one that I'll call your attention to is in that light green, 4.5% of the budget, and that is what we spend on supplies. So that's not only paper and pencils and crayons in the classrooms, but that's also going to include our utilities, the fuel and the electricity we buy for our buildings. And so as we go through the budget process, or as we get feedback from voters on the budget, one of the things that we had heard in the past pretty frequently is if we didn't spend as much on crayons, we could somehow save a bunch of money, or if we didn't let teachers make so many photocopies, we'd be able to save a lot of money. And when we have those discussions, we're really talking about that small slice of the pie. If we're going to move these budgets are really any budget in education. It's going to be tied to staffing. This slide shows that same budget based on what we do rather than what we buy. So the section a little more than half in green is sort of what I think of as traditional education. It's students in front of teachers in classrooms with stuff. And that's kind of what's encompassed in that. We've got regular education. There's some vocational education is in there as well. And then going around the clock in blue are things that we do in support of that education. So to be a little more specific than that, starting at about 7 o'clock, that first section, student support, is primarily guidance counselors and nurses. That next section, instructional support in white, is a lot of our technology purchases. Professional development for teachers would fall in there. That little thin line in dark blue is costs for the school board and costs for some of the district-wide insurance that we have to pay. The next piece from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock is school administration. So that's the cost of your 4 principals and their offices and their support staff. 9 to 10 o'clock at about 10%, central services. So those are those services that come in from the supervisory union again. A little bit bigger a slice, operations and maintenance in dark blue. This is the cost of maintaining our 4 campuses. So repairs to those buildings and the staff that do those repairs. And then lastly up top is a slice for cost for moving kids to and from school.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about per pupil spending. So in the state of Vermont, we talk about weighted pupils. So it is, this is really a comparison of the current year that we're in. So each of these represents one of the 119 districts in the state of Vermont. So when we look at this here, this shows a comparison from the lowest spending system in Vermont that is probably around 8,500 to 9,000 to the highest spending system in Vermont that is just over $18,000. So you can see there's quite a discrepancy between the lowest spending per pupil and the highest spending per pupil. So these red lines reflect our partners in Franklin County. This black line represents the county average spending, which is around 13,300. And then that second black line is the statewide average, which is, I think, just under 1,400, 13,900. This bottom line is, for this current year, is where this Enosburg-Richford district is in comparison. And this blue line is where our other district, the Northern Mountain Valley, is for this current year. So these bottom 5 or so lines represent systems that don't actually operate schools. They tuition out all of their students. So those are considered non-operating districts. So what we discovered recently, the last couple of budgets have now been warned. Some systems don't vote until April. So now we have a look at the proposed spending for each system for FY27. So the budget we're talking about tonight, and our budgets that we're proposing for Enosburg-Richford and Northern Mountain Valley will drop us down. So we will be the lowest spending and the second lowest spending districts in the state of Vermont, districts that operate schools in the state of Vermont for this next year. One of the things that I think it's important to note is that we're still very proud of the work that we're doing with our students, and we're doing some really innovative things and some things that aren't happening in some other schools across the state. And I think part of the reason for that is that we're very savvy, and we go out and look for competitive grants to be able to bring opportunities to our students. And one thing that I think people may not know is that our LEAPS 21st Century After School program is something that only about half of the students in the state of Vermont have access to. And that's a competitive grant that we seek every time it comes around, every 5 years. So we recently received an additional grant on top of our LEAPS grant. So we have a 21st Century Community Learning Center grant, and that one is $533,141 in addition to the other grants that we already sought. Most recently on the Enosburg-Richford side, there is a $15,000 grant that we were awarded from the Vermont Lottery for the Educate and Innovate Grant Award. This was given to 2 schools this year. Last year it was also given to 2 systems, and we received it last year for Northern Mountain Valley, those 4 schools there. So we're constantly looking for ways that we can do a lot with not a lot of resources. We find ways to find other resources. Another thing that we're really proud of is the work we're doing with our first robotics program at Enosburg High School. We were able to use some of the ESSER grant funding that we received from the federal government during the pandemic to be able to invest in that robotics team, and they are in their 2nd year. So if people want to read this in the annual report, we're very proud of that. I was able to observe this group of students working on this year's challenge for the first robotics, and they're currently building their robot, and they're trying to solve for how they're going to accomplish the task that they have this year. Each year it's something different. If you have a minute to click on that link, if you look at this, you can either type the link into your browser, or you can go online and look at our annual report there. It is pretty fun to watch our team in last year's competition. So it just shows you about a 3-minute round of what the robots have to do or had to do last year. So I also want to just talk about governance structures, because I think this is something that has become really clear this year, that there's some confusion both at the state level and in our area about the different governance structures that currently exist. So this compares us in Franklin Northeast with our neighbor, MVU. So MVU has a simpler governance structure. They're considered a supervisory district. MVU has 1 board, they're considered 1 employer, they have 1 budget, and they have 1 audit. So what that means is they can use their physical and their human resources really flexibly, because everything goes under that 1 umbrella. All of their schools send their students to MVU, so there's no choice within that district. That is not true in FNESU. We have 2 separate districts, and that has to do with a decision that was made during Act 46. We considered whether or not we wanted to be a merged system or if we wanted to remain a supervisory union, and the voters wanted to maintain choice. So the students in NMV have high school choice, so we only operate schools pre-K 8 in that district, and then we tuition out those 9th through 12th students. In Enosburg-Richford, we don't tuition out. We operate schools pre-K through 12, so students stay in those 2 communities. So what that means is that our governance structure is more complicated. So we have to have a supervisory union board, we have to have a Northern Mountain Valley board, and an Enosburg-Richford board. So it really means we have 3 separate employers, we have 3 separate boards, 3 separate budgets, 3 separate payrolls, 3 separate audits. So there's a lot of duplication of efforts that we have within our system. And we can't easily move employees between our 2 districts because their contracts lie with those individual entities. So we have tried to be really creative in how we think about our human resources and thinking about the needs of our students and the needs of our educators. So we have made strategic decisions about making some of our positions system level. So we hold at the FNESU level some of these contracts. So anything that's related to emerging multilingual services, instructional coaching, technology integration, special education, food service, and facilities. So that means that I'll use instructional coaches as an example. When I was a principal years ago, we might have all been looking for an instructional coach, all 9 of the principals. There may have been 2 instructional coaches that we're able to find. So one school would get a coach, another school would get a coach. The other schools didn't have a coach because they weren't able to hire. So some teachers got the benefit of having instructional coaching and some didn't. So we're much more strategic now. So we hold those contracts here, And we're able to look at the whole picture in all 9 of our schools, and we're able to say, we have this level of need on the Northern Mountain Valley side, and we have this level of need on the Enosburg-Richford side, and this is how we're going to deploy our instructional coaches across those districts because we're holding them there. The same for our, if we're thinking about student-specific needs, so students that need emerging multilingual supports. Sometimes when we were holding the contracts just at the district level, it was tricky because sometimes those students would be transient and move between our system partway through the year, but we might only have that support in one district. So that contract is here now, and it doesn't matter which schools they're in. We look at what the need of the student is, and then we deploy strategically that way. So that's one way that we have figured out how to work around the barrier that exists with our existing governance structure. Another way that I think that we have been really savvy here is that after the pandemic, well, let me back up for a second. We have always had students in our system, and this is true of every system across the state and probably the country, whose needs are more complex than what you can meet within the general education classroom. So they need something a little more. So there have been students over the years that we have sent to out-of-district placements. Could have been in Project SOAR, could have been Laraway, Baird, Centerpoint, any number of locations. After COVID, a lot of those programs either closed their doors or they reopened with very limited staffing, very limited hours, very limited resources. So there were not a lot of resources that our students could access. At the same time, we saw really elevated needs with our students. So we actually built our own in-house in FNESU alternative programs. So we now have a STEPS program that supports students who have intensive behavioral challenges, and a RISE program. And the RISE program supports students who have intensive developmental disabilities. We host both of those programs in Enosburg because it is central to all 6 of our towns. So students are brought in from those towns and they receive their services, higher level services in these programs. So we did a dive into a cost analysis this year to try to get a sense of if we had a student that we needed to send out to an alternative program, the average per pupil tuition for this year is between $100,000 and $150,000 per student. When you send a child out, you also have to pay per pupil transportation costs, and that ranges between $40,000 and $60,000, so that it is quite a price tag per student. We looked at our true costs in FNESU for our alternative programs this year, and it cost us $47,000 per student, and that includes all transportation. We have 2 vans that we use to help with transportation where there's not bus transportation, and we also use that to get our students out into the community, building skills in different places in our community. So that is one way that we have saved millions of dollars by having these programs in-house in our communities.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about going from the proposed budget and how we go from that to a tax rate. So you can see on the first line, again, this is the number that we are asking for authority from the voters to spend next year. If that's passed, we know that we're going to get a little over $6 million in revenue from other sources. On this side in this district, it's primarily tuition from Northern Mountain Valley towns, and then the next largest chunk are grants tied to the tech center. We also know that we're proposing using $336,000 that was left over from the 2025 school year and using that to buy down tax rates. We know that that's money we have in the bank that we don't need to raise even if this budget is passed. So we start with that 25, we subtract the money we know we're gonna get or that we know we're gonna have, and we have this figured just under 19 million, which is what's called education spending. This is the number. If this budget passes, I will go to the state and I will say, I need you to send us $18.9 million for next year so that we can operate our schools. because this is Vermont and this is how the system works, the state's obligated to send that to us. In order to come up with this money, they basically tap three different buckets. One is the homestead tax rate, so it's the property tax that we all pay on the places that we live. The non-homestead tax rate, which is property tax on camps and businesses and farmland, and basically any land where we don't have people who are living there full time. And then the third bucket that they get money from is kind of loosely an other bucket. It's primarily rooms and meals tax, sales tax, lottery proceeds. There's some money from Medicaid in there and a couple other smaller sources. To come up with a roughly 1/4 of that funding that comes from the property tax, they work to set that per pupil spending amount. And again, that's the number that the state uses to compare us to other districts in the state. So they're going to take the money that we need from the state and they're going to divide it by this weighted pupil count called the long-term weighted ADM. Basically, this is a count of the kids that we have in our school. Now, we talked earlier that we have, in terms of our enrollment, there's just over 1,000 kids in our school, but we get to count over 1,600. The reason for that is the state knows that there are certain classes of students that are more expensive to educate than others. So they will look at our student body and they will give us additional counts for kids who are not hearing English spoken at home or kids who are living in poverty, a few other categories in there. And so that tends to bump that number up. But the state will take that education spending number, divide it by the kid count, and come up with that $11,430 figure. So again, our budget up 1%, this number up about 2.6%. To translate that into a tax rate, and again, this number is different for every district across the state, they're going to divide it by what's called the yield number, and that's a number that the legislature sets, and that's going to be the same for every district in the tax rate. The number that we're using here is the number that was released on December 1st. It's based on estimates that the tax department has at the time, and the one thing that we know is that that number is not going to be correct. So we'll walk through this. Using that December 1 number, the projected district-wide tax rate would be just over $1.29, or about a half a penny lower than it was last year, which would be great if the story stopped there. If you go back a slide first. In terms of this yield number, yesterday the Joint Fiscal Office was in the legislature presenting updated numbers, and the number that they had here, if the legislature doesn't make any other policy decisions, was 89.13, a little bit higher yield, which would push this rate down about a penny. The other big thing that's moving in the legislature is that the governor in December proposed using $75 million to buy down the tax rates this year. The legislature was very interested in that. The number seems to have drifted up to just over 100 million for next year. Depending on how they use that money, if they use that money, it could be an additional 2.5 cents down to an additional 7 cents down. And they're kind of duking it out now how they would apply that. But it could be significantly lower. And so we're confident that this is not the number, but we're confident that this is by far the worst case scenario. And now we can go to the common level of appraisal. We'd be sitting pretty if this is where the story stopped. We'd be saying we're the lowest spending district in the state and we're giving you a tax cut. The state then takes this rate and applies it by a common level of appraisal, which is unique to each town. What they're trying to do with the common level of appraisal is recognize that towns are reappraising their grand lists at different times. So in Richford, they just had a reappraisal 2 years ago. In Enosburg, it's been probably, I'm going to guess, 20 years since they've had a reappraisal. So when I look at my tax bill in Richford and my assessed value is $200,000, that's probably a lot more accurate than somebody in Enosburg looking at their bill where that number says $200,000 because it hasn't been updated in 2 decades. And so we get that common level of appraisal from the state, and the state will divide that district amount by the common level of appraisal. So the Enosburg rate, folks that Enosburg taxpayers will see on their bill is just over $1.49 or a 7-cent increase, and in Richford just over $1 or a 4-cent increase. Again, worst case scenario, before we drop this by a penny or by 3.5 cents or by 8 cents. On the next slide, you can kind of see another way of looking at the impact of the common level of appraisal. So in Richford, if I look at my tax bill and it says my house is worth $200,000, based on property sales, the state thinks that that property is worth $221,000. Again, that's because their grand list is much more accurate because they've just gone through a reappraisal. In Enosburg, that $200,000 property, that listed property on the fair market would be worth $329,000. And so the state wants the rate in Enosburg to be higher to make up for that difference. When a town goes through a reappraisal, they will see here that the tax rate drops pretty significantly. So this was the old grand list in Richford, and this was the first year with their new grand list. Even though that rate drops dramatically, folks are going to be spending roughly the same amount of money. It'll be more accurate, but that 200,000 figure on their tax bill in 23 is now going to be 300,000 or whatever the number is. So in this chart, you can see that since FY20, the first year that we were a unified district, the tax rate has been steadily increasing in Enosburg. In Richford, it was flat until that reappraisal year, and now it's starting to climb back as property values are now selling over market compared to what was appraised in FY24. And again, depending on where that yield ends up, it's certainly not unreasonable to think that Richford's could end up flat or down a little bit, and Enosburg's could end up flat as well. In the book, you can see our projection, again, based on this December 1 yield, this worst case scenario, in terms of what people who are paying based on their income would likely see as a tax increase, and those paying based on the full value of their property would see as a tax increase. So in Vermont, if your household income is below $115,400, you should be eligible for a credit against your tax bill. In Enosburg, someone paying based on their income at any level is probably already going to see a decrease. In Richford, folks who are at the lowest income levels will probably see a decrease. And then for folks who are paying based on the full value, probably a moderate increase in both towns. And again, this is with the worst case scenario.
So you've likely heard about Act 73. This is a pretty substantial shift in how we operate schools in Vermont. And this was passed last July 1st. If we're going to go over just a few of the changes that are proposed in this law. So by July 1, 2027, the State Board of Education is expected to announce statewide graduation requirements that would go into effect for the class of 2031. What we know is that the Agency of Education provided the State Board of Education with recommendations around those graduation requirements back in December of 2025. So we're watching that carefully to see where it lands. Also in this law is that a statewide calendar is supposed to be developed by the Agency of Education that would go into effect by July 1 of 2028. The calendar has always been expected to be regionally aligned, and so for us, we work to align our calendar with the Champlain Valley. That's what it's expected in the law currently. However, Vermont superintendents have worked pretty collaboratively over the last 2 school years, and our calendars are more aligned than they've ever been. So all of our vacations now align, and some of our in-services align, and for many people, the first day of school aligns. It kind of ends there. There are some other differences that will need to be worked out down the road. Another change that came with Act 73 is that we saw with the passage of Act 73 fewer schools that were allowed to receive public tuition dollars, fewer private and independent schools that were allowed to receive those dollars. In addition, in Act 73, a part of the law went into effect that mandates minimum class sizes, and this part went into effect on July 1 of 2025. So we will be submitting data through our student information system that the agency will be monitoring to make sure we're in compliance with minimum class sizes in all of our schools. So it establishes a range of minimum class size. So for example, 10 students, no fewer than 10 students in first grade, 12 students in second through fifth, 15 students in sixth through eighth, and 18 students in ninth through 12th. So we saw this coming through the legislative session, and we actually have been working on class sizes for the last couple of years with our administrators. And so they did some work last year to really look at numbers and classes and trying to figure out. We had some really small classes and merging some sections together. So we were able to make some reductions, really through attrition, mostly at Enosburg High School. For example, we now have 3 core teachers instead of 4, and our class sizes are a little larger than they've been. So we're much closer to meeting some of these minimum class sizes. We're not there completely everywhere, but we've definitely gotten closer. So that is something we'll need to continue to lean into, because there are real consequences if you fail to meet those minimum class size standards for 3 consecutive years. So these are the actions that can be taken. The state board, based on AOE recommendation, could require that the agency provide technical assistance to schools. They could choose to adjust supervisor union boundaries. They could assume control of a school. They could close a school, or they could require district consolidation. So these are now law, and we're having to make adjustments within our systems to be able to come into compliance with these minimum class sizes.
But the part of Act 73 that's getting the most play right now is around the new maps. The legislature put in Act 73 that they would create larger school districts by July of this year. Again, these are going to consolidate districts and superintendent offices, not schools. So it's going to be fewer of Lynn and fewer of me in the state, but it doesn't touch schools, or doesn't touch them yet. The legislature created a task force with the intention that they would develop 3 maps to bring to them so that they had a starting point in January for this work. They did not bring any back, and so the legislature's really been kind of spinning its wheels for the first 6 weeks of the session. There are 3 maps now that are circulating. One of them would put all of the districts, current districts, into one single Vermont school district. And I don't think that's going to get any play in either the House or the Senate. The House is discussing a map that would combine Enosburg-Richford, Northern Mountain Valley, so our 2 FNESU districts, with MVU and with Alburg. And so those 4 districts combined into one would be roughly 4,000 kids. And Act 73 was contemplating districts between 4,000 and 8,000 kids. And so given the way that Act 73 is written, that seems like a logical match, and they've done similar things throughout the state. In the Senate, they have taken a different path and basically proposed putting most of the state into larger supervisory unions and then giving them another 3 years to do some voluntary mergers on their own. So for us, I think it would be Franklin County and Grand Isle County in a single supervisory union. So you think about the slides that Lynn was showing earlier, MVU right now has a pretty efficient governance structure. Maple Run similarly has a pretty efficient governance structure. They would now be thrown into a new larger SU and kind of do some backsliding in terms of their efficiency. I don't have a sense at what kind of traction that's going to get in the Senate. I don't think the House likes the idea of bigger supervisory unions, but there's going to be some horse trading there to sort it out.
I think that would be close to 10 districts. So you'd have one supervisory union with 10 districts underneath it. So as complicated as it looks when we talk about the 3 ways that you duplicate efforts, this would be 10 ways that you would duplicate efforts in that kind of governance structure. Can we go back a slide? There's one thing I forgot to say around the class size minimums. So even though this law isn't really talking about closing schools, there are things in the law like class size minimums that will naturally result in that. So right now we have some very small micro schools throughout the state of Vermont, and they're going to struggle to meet these class size minimums. We have, I think, around 100 schools in Vermont that serve under 100 or fewer students. So in the past, some ways that those super small schools, we have schools that have served under 25 in the past. They've been able to put together a 3 or 4 grade level multi-age classroom. And in this law, one thing that they can no longer do is do a multi-age that includes more than 2 grade levels. So it is going to be very limiting for some of those very small schools.
And then a couple more things on the governance changes. When a new map, if a new map is drawn, they will also have to draw voting wards and figure out how to do voting. So under Act 46, we kind of all got to propose whatever voting scheme we wanted to. Here we've got an equal number of people from Richford and an equal number of people from Enosburg. They are likely to say, for Franklin North, let's say, we're going to do wards that would include these 3 towns might get 1 seat on the board, and these 2 might get 1, and this one might get 1, and it'll be much more tied to proportionality. In terms of the timeline, in the current law, the boards would be elected in November of 2027 and expected to be running schools in July of 2028. So they get elected in November, they start meeting in December, they're going to need to hire a superintendent. They're going to need to have a search process to hire a superintendent. So maybe, if they're lucky, they could get one by March. They're going to need to agree on what they want for a superintendent, and they've never met before as a board. So maybe that's April, May now. And then the superintendent's going to have to go out and hire staff and be ready to roll in 2 months.
It's not really realistic.
It's not realistic. I was hoping that the discussion in the legislature this session would be how do we amend the timeline to make that more realistic. And it sounds like that may be a fight we have to have next year, assuming that anything comes out this year. And then the last thing on Act 73, it is changing how we fund education. So as we walk through on the tax rate calculation, right now the voters can vote whatever they want, and that's the budget, and the state is required to come up with that money and send it to the district. Most states, I think 48 of the other 49, do it in the other direction. So the state determines how much money you're going to get per student and sends it to you, and that's your budget. There would be some ability, if you feel that you need to spend more than that you could go to the voters and spend more. But for the most part, certainly up here, if we get anything close to the average amount of money in the state, we'll say thank you very much. We don't need any additional money. That's going to be a windfall for our kids. Currently, it's contingent on governance changes. So if they don't draw the map, the new funding formula doesn't come into place. I think there's some interest in pushing the funding formula forward, whether or not we have a new map, for various reasons. I'm happy to chat with people offline on that. 2 other changes to funding. They're tweaking that income sensitivity piece a bit. And then they're also talking about splitting that non-homestead grand list up so that in the future they would have the ability to tax, say, rental properties at a different rate than businesses or farms or camps. And so that gives them a little bit more leverage to make some policy decisions on how they want to change land use for non-homestead. One other money article on the warning, looking for authority to deposit half of the surplus funds from the 2025 school year into the Capital Reserve Fund. This is something that we put on the warning every year. We actually ended 2025 with almost $673,000 in the bank. If the article is rejected but the budget's passed, we would just put more into buying down the tax rate. But the board still feels that it's prudent, given that our largest school has not yet been tested for PCBs. We've got an aging infrastructure like all schools in Vermont, that we continue to put funds away into the Capital Reserve Fund. And then finally, town meeting day is March 3rd. In Richford, polls open at 11, close at 7. It's at the town hall. 10 to 7 for Enosburg-Richford public safety building. Early voting has started, so you can go to your town clerks and vote in person, or you can take a ballot and fill it out and mail it back in. And we're just reminding people that it's been several years since Vermont has had same-day mail delivery. So if you do mail it in, I'd give yourself several days. And I think with that, we are happy to try to answer any questions.
Thinking back to a couple of years ago, the famous taxpayer revolt on school budgets.
Yeah.
I think I remember you talking about a minimum amount of money that state would allow school districts. How close is the 27 budget to that minimum?
So that was a minimum amount that they would tax you. So it wasn't how much money they'd give you, but there was a point where you could cut your budget so low they would still send you the same tax bill. And we were very close to it that year. We are not close to it now because they changed some of the background calculations. I suspect part of the reason was because of that. But we are, with that new formula, we're still a ways from that.
Okay.
They changed where the floor is.
Yeah.
That's a great question, though.
So, in the budget category that's called support services, when I looked at this, I was surprised that the amount in that was 45% of the total budget. Initially, that seemed like a lot to me, but and then if you back out the operations and maintenance and the transportation, you come up with an amount that's roughly a third of the total. So, is that a side effect of the complicated organizational structure that you were talking about? Like, if we compare ourselves to MVU, as you did in that example, do they have a much smaller percentage that's spent on support services than compared to direct instruction?
Can we talk about first what is in support services?
And it's, as you're kind of alluding to, it's really an unhelpful bucket. It's too broad a bucket because it contains so many things that are different. In terms of the system, I would say that there is potential for that, but I would also, I would put our spending up against probably anybody in the state. And I think that's because of the the district, we have such a low spending that we've been really keeping that down. Transportation is going to be higher for us than for South Burlington, where people are closer together. Things like your operations and maintenance. In theory, if you have fewer but bigger schools, that's going to be a smaller percentage. You might see some savings on school administration as well, although I think that's probably less indicative. And then I think in terms of that student support, that's an area where coming out of COVID, we have seen an increase just statewide and really countrywide in terms of students coming to us from a much different starting point and needing more support.
I think that at the same time that happened, our mental health agencies have seen flat budgets. They haven't had any increases, so their level of support has diminished while need has gone up through no fault of their own. So schools across the state have taken on more and more of the social services and the mental health roles than we've ever had to before. So I think that is very different. And to your point about scale, our scale is different with 9 buildings. Our partners in MVU, I believe, have 4. Maple Run has 4. And BFA Fairfax also has 4, right? Fletcher, Fairfax, Jordan, maybe 3.
Maybe, yeah.
I think, yeah. So that part is a little bit different. It does take more to operate when you have twice as many of those buildings.
So the support services, that's a pretty hefty increase from FY26 to FY27. Is that a legally mandated thing? Has something? Are school districts forced to spend that money by law? Or is it something we're choosing to do?
So I guess which part of, can you say again? So you're
Yeah.
looking at talk about the common chart of accounts too, so that I
Sure.
think that will help him.
And I would say that the support services section of the budget's only up 0.5%, and the instruction's up 1.5%. So as a percent, it's actually a smaller increase. But again, those categories, and we are required by the state to try to put all of our expenses into specific categories. Student support, again, is guidance counselors and nurses. There's some recommendations on how much of those that we need. I don't know how much of a mandate it is.
It's in the ed quality standards, so it's not law, but it is in state board rules. So some of those do fall in there.
Instructional support, again, is technology and professional development for teachers, a relatively small part of that support services total. Again, there's probably quality standards, but not necessarily mandates.
That part's in law. The professional learning is in law.
Okay.
Okay, so I see what you're saying now. The FY26 budget and 27 proposed is not such a. I was looking at the spent through December column.
Oh, gotcha. Yep.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, and then I think school administration, I suppose we probably do need school secretaries. We need them, but
yes.
Principals are required to be there. Central services, it's really, Lynn had talked about a lot of that is stuff that we are doing because we can do it more efficiently at the SU because we have that SU structure and we can't move folks around across districts.
We've also been really strategic around that. Like when we have things, we get things all the time that are mandated in law that, we've got to do this report or we've got to do something that gets passed in a law. We try to do it at our level and then push it out wherever we can because we also recognize that our people are holding all they can in our buildings. So we try, if we can, to not put it on their plates to begin with. So we do a lot of that and hold that labor at our level. So which part of the budget you've talked about in others, librarians and it's not interventionists. You had another category because when you were talking about school counselors, you were also talking about
Yeah, librarians and interventionists
Yeah.
generally are under that instructional support as well. That 2,200.
Okay.
And kind of the big picture is student support is, I think, nurses and guidance counselors, people interacting directly with the student. The instructional support, librarians, maybe helping teachers, professional development for teachers. Yeah, interventionists would be under instruction themselves, but you can think of student support as really very much student facing. Instructional support is really making teachers either better at their job or giving them tools to do their job better.
So the way was thinking of it initially, and what I think you just confirmed, any position within the school system where you have a staff person directly interacting with the students, it's under the direct instruction. It would be the 1,000 series of
It would
numbers.
either be 1,000 or, depending on how you want to make that definition, it could be the 2,100 as well.
Okay.
Because that would be nurses, that would be guidance counselors.
The nurses, guidance counselors are included in 2,100.
Yeah.
The librarians, interventionists, paras, or whatever, are those positions in the 1,000 series?
Paras would be in the 1,000 series, librarians would be in 2,200.
Okay.
I think if you go to our website, there is a budget detail. Most people are not super interested in seeing that level of detail, but you can see rather than the 2,100 series, you can see kind of each category that's broken out underneath.
I looked through that. Okay. All right, I'll take another.
And it's broken out by school as well, but it'll just, it might help you understand what's in those bigger categories rather than being useful by itself.
So it's not quite as simplistic as I had originally envisioned, sounds like. Okay. Okay.
if you think of any other questions as you're re-looking at that, we're both in this week. Feel free to give us a call. Okay. Did you have any others for tonight?
No. I primarily wanted to get some clarity around what budget bucket held what functional expenses, I guess.
That part's really complicated, and I do have to tell you that I had to do one budget meeting without him, and I'm glad that no one asked those questions at that meeting because I rely on him to know where those specific things go. So thank you for coming. We appreciate having someone in person.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.